So today we're going to be talking about KubeVirt and virtualization on Kubernetes. My guests are Poonam and Roopak. We'll meet them in a second, but before that, let me give you some information about what we'll talk about at the end of the show. So before we meet our guests, we're going to talk about Kube. We'll be at KubeCon, so we'll talk about that at the end. So stick around till the end of it, and I'll give you a little bit more information. So without rambling, let's go ahead and meet our guests. So we got Roopak on the top left. So we'll meet Roopak first. So how are you doing, Roopak?
Hello, Mike. Doing fine. Thanks for
Awesome.
having
How are
me.
you doing? So how are you doing today, Poonam? And then I'll
Yeah,
get to your backgrounds.
I'm fine, Mike. Thanks for having me. Thank
All
you.
right, cool. So let's go to Rupak. Let's go ahead and get a little bit of background on you first. So what's your background in tech, and what are you mainly focusing on now at Platform Nine?
Well, I have a lot of gray hair, so I've been around for a while, and I've done a lot of things starting from security, PKI to now infrastructure management. And prior to founding Platform 9, I was at VMware where we did a bunch of cool stuff in infrastructure management. And now at Platform 9, we are continuing on that tradition with first virtualization with OpenStack and now with containers using Kubernetes. And obviously, we are here to talk about KubeVirt, so we'll talk more on that. At Platform 9, in the last few years, I've been focused more on the edge product line that we have, where we try to work with our customers on SASE, retail, telco, and other edge-related use cases.
So I say KubeVirt fits into that perfectly, right? So how about you, Poonam? What's your
Absolutely.
background in tech, and what are you working on now?
So my background in tech, I started pretty basic actually. I've done my engineering in biomedical, and since then I've been intrigued with the power of open source actually. So I mean, I started off with Linux. So Linux and cloud are mainly my core skills. And my journey looks like I started off with a junior Linux tech to a senior tech, then an SME, and then gradually moving on to infrastructure architecture. And then finally, for the last few years, I've been into the cloud architecture space. And prior to Platform 9, I was with Entity Global Networks, and I was working as a cloud architect for them, and specifically focusing around the applications which are called as NFV applications, which is a popular term. I'm sure everyone knows it. So it's basically network applications like UTMs and UTMs. I mean firewalls and WAN optimizers, SD-WAN, all those kind of solutions on the clouds, right? So edge computing, Rupa, same term. So is
Mhm.
what kind of fits into that. And currently with Platform 9, I'm a part of the bare metal and virtualization engineering team. And I focus on the products like OpenStack, the bare metal products like Ironic, and then also KubeVirt. So today, I guess we're going to talk a lot about KubeVirt today. So
Are you doing
that's
any
where.
development or anything like that, or is it mostly architecture and design and stuff like that?
So my work around KubeVirt is like a lot of it came from my experience with KubeVirt during my tenure with Entity. And when I say so, it is development, of course. So some of it is including bug fixes, and then the other part is how the architecture is and what are the improvements we can do to ensure it's a stable enterprise grade platform
Gotcha.
for
So you know a little bit of
customers.
Go and some Python too, right? So you're switching between OpenStack
Yeah,
Python over to Go with KubeVirt. All right. So
yeah,
let me go since we're on. Let me ask you, since we keep saying the word, what is KubeVirt? So what is it to you? Like, what do you what's the project? What does it do?
So, KubeVirt is basically a virtualization API for Kubernetes. So it's basically a add-on or an extension to Kubernetes, and it allows you to run the virtual machines alongside containers on with a single unified control plane. So that's really uh, the very summary sort of definition of what KubeVirt is. So it allows you to run VMs alongside containers. So um, and it's an extension to Kubernetes, which means that it's the same semantics of Kubernetes, but gives you the power of virtualization along with that. So it's like a combination of two.
And what's your executive level sell, Rupak, for what's KubeVirt? What does it do?
No, I think that's a very important question, Mike. If I am a uh, architect at one of the enterprises, and if I'm asking myself, hey, I have a bunch of virtual machines, or some of my legacy applications that needs virtual machines to run. And I have these new fangled microservices that are coming out that want containers, and everyone is trying to get trying to get Kubernetes. So how do I marry both of those worlds? And really, KubeVirt is the answer. It's a lightweight, built on top of Kubernetes, like Poonam said, using Kubernetes orchestration to run virtual machines, along with containers. And guess what? They are on the same networks. So containers and virtual machine can talk to each other. So that solves your problem, and really optimize your OpEx because you have the same people working with virtual machines, same people working with containers, both developers as well as your DevOps, as well as the operations team. So everything is there. It's lightweight. It saves cost and the hassle of managing multiple systems.
And it's perfect for bare metal and edge, I would imagine too, right?
Oh,
Yes.
absolutely. It's pretty
Yes.
lightweight. It's pretty lightweight, and it's built on top of the technologies that have been around for a while: KVM, libvirt, QEMU, and we all know that it has worked for many different platforms. So the underlying platform is the same. It's the orchestration layer, which is Kubernetes, and we get all the nice things from Kubernetes. High availability. So I was talking to a customer, and they said, "Oh, we need to include high availability." And I said, "You know what? With KubeVirt, it comes out of the box because guess what? That's what Kubernetes does. It has a smart scheduling system that comes with Kubernetes, and KubeVirt benefits from them. That so everything that works for Kubernetes, KubeVirt benefits from that. Now, in addition to it, it's also future looking. So if you look at systems that were created 10, 20 years ago, they would have REST API or SOAP APIs, but not really declarative. It's not infrastructure as a code, but if you look at Kubernetes in general, you can declare and say, this is what I want. And the system takes care of attaining those results. It's a desired outcome. And that's where we are going. And KubeVirt is exactly there. So it has good properties of the old mature KVM virtualization engine with nice properties of Kubernetes and supporting microservices.
So here's a question for both of you. I guess we can start with Roopak. So what does my density look like for servers with this, right? Like I'm running containers alongside VMs. I mean, they're running in containers too, but what does density look like? Am I oversubscribing like I used to? Have I changed that model? Am I oversubbing memory and CPU and stuff like I used to do? Or is there better management for resources with this?
It's about the same. There's really no difference. Now, with Kubernetes, typically people don't oversubscribe. If you look at default Kubernetes deployments, they will not use swap at all. CPU is a different matter, but they won't use swap at all. So you can go that route, or you can enable swap and then you can oversubscribe for dev and test use cases. So really, it doesn't really matter. In fact, I would say the density is going to be better because the overhead from the management services, specifically Kubernetes, is much lower than some of the competing products out there. So from a density perspective, if that's your goal, my suggestion would be to turn on the swap, and then do oversubscription on your deployments, and you will get the desired results.
Poonam, do you have any updates on that too, like from a technical side as well, or have you seen customers using like any? You say no oversubscription or anything like that? Like, or is it what's the difference? Like, because you've seen OpenStack too.
So I would say I pretty much agree with Roopak on that. So we don't really need to oversubscribe. So whatever we use with a VM is pretty much what you'll use it with KubeVirt. So on a bare metal virtualization versus KubeVirt, you would pretty much use the same resources. And in fact, Kubernetes being self-healing in nature, of course, that gives us a added advantage when it comes to scaling or management of the nodes that are running both. So definitely, I think I agree with Roopak on that. There would be a slight difference. The Kubernetes layer would itself take up some amount of RAM, but that is not a huge amount. So in terms of oversubscription, it's pretty much the same. You will pretty much use the same resources with both the platforms.
All right, so let's move on to the next one. What are some of the best use cases for this? Like you've kind of touched on a little bit. Like I want to move my platform over to use containers and virtual machines? What are some of the best use cases you've seen, maybe for customers?
So I think one of the biggest things is what Rupak mentioned. So if I'm an enterprise and I'm looking at my journey towards digital transformation and moving towards cloud native, then I would need to run CNFs, a way to run CNFs and VNFs together, because I cannot really overnight migrate all my VNFs to CNFs. That doesn't really happen. So KubeVirt basically is
For
a
people that
path.
are new, you want to expand on what those mean? What is a CNF versus a
So
VNF?
it's basically a container networking function versus a virtual network. So initially it was actually PNF, which is physical network functions. So you will have just a physical NIC, and then you kind of use that NIC for communicating, right? The next level came like the VNF, which is virtual network functions, wherein you apply virtual NICs to your VMs, then use that for networking. And the latest is your CNF. CNF is the container networking functions. So that is moving towards Kubernetes or cloud native in general. Now, what I mean is, like, if you are an organization who is purely into VM workloads at the moment, so I'm running all VMs at the moment, but I do want to like move towards digital transformation, move towards cloud native as a platform. I move towards containers as a platform. KubeVirt gives me a way to run both together. And there are some industries, like for instance telcos, who would have a combination of VNFs and CNFs that they would want to run in their environment, and that is where KubeVirt fits in. Right, it just fits in as a correct sort of choice. So best use cases, I would say any company who is like wanting currently on VMs, because people cannot really move overnight from VMs to containers like that, right? So if you are a company who wants to, your applications are something which you can decouple them into microservices, you want to move towards containerization, but also runs VMs at the same time without investing into two different infrastructures for both VNF and CNF. So suppose if I'm an organization who is running VMs at the moment, for instance OpenStack, right, and I'm looking at, say, containerization, I would want to have another stack which is running containers, which is an overhead in terms of management. Two different stacks for VMs and containers, which is really not realistic, right? So KubeVirt gives you a way to run both together, which is great, and you can eventually migrate your workloads from VNFs to CNFs as in when the applications develop, right? So this is what I think is the best sort of industry use case. Any company who's looking at transformation and want to move from VMs to containers, I think KubeVirt is the best choice.
So you kind of mentioned like there was a middle ground, right? Like where people were using OpenStack and then they would deploy VMs and then deploy Kubernetes on top of that. This takes away all of the OpenStack overhead, takes away all the RabbitMQ
Yeah.
headaches and different things that you notice
Yeah.
there. So what's your upsell, Rupak, for executives when you're saying, okay, so you're on OpenStack, or you're on VMware, you're on OpenStack, you're on cloud, but you want to go bare metal or edge. This is a better option for you to start with if you're rebuilding your infrastructure. What are some of the things you think are the best use cases for that?
Mike, you summarized it well. If you look at OpenStack and KubeVirt, as I said, the underlying hypervisor is the same, KVM is the same. So frankly, the images that you have created for your OpenStack, they actually work with KubeVirt. So that's number one. And from our experience with OpenStack and VMware, we know that you can transform your images from VMware to to images that work on OpenStack and KubeVirt pretty easily. So that transformation is possible as well. And really, if you're looking for an agile stack, this is where KubeVirt fits in. And while Poonam mentioned that many people who want to use the cloud native technologies are looking at KubeVirt, what we see in our experience is that's about everyone in the enterprises. Everyone is looking to create their new applications as a cloud native application that runs on Kubernetes. That means everyone who has any kind of workloads which they want to run today, plus want to move to new technologies, KubeVirt is applicable for them. So let me give you a couple of examples to illustrate. So we have a customer who's a developer support team. So this is the team that deals with builds, your CI/CD pipeline. They started looking at Kubernetes to deploy deploy their CI/CD pipeline and all the builders. So that's how they started with Kubernetes, and they were very successful with it. 2 years down the line, they said, you know what, with KubeVirt and Platform 9 supporting KubeVirt, why don't we try to build some of the other applications that are coming from third party and they don't really have any control over transforming those applications? Why don't we run it on the same platform? And now they're on the journey to really take over those virtual machines which were running either on OpenStack or VMware, primarily VMware, and moving over to this platform where they already have certain workloads running on Kubernetes in containers, and now they will have these virtual machines running side by side with them. So now, for their team, look at the efficiency they are gaining. There's one set of administrators who are working with one system day in day out to manage all these workloads together.
So it was fun to start working with KubeVirt again after working with OpenStack because it just brought back all the memories, right? Because it's just like you said, it's the same images, it's cloud in it, it's the same stuff. And then like running Ceph in the background to give storage to everything. It's doing it a little bit better, right? Like it's a little bit quicker too.
And Mike, you touched upon something very interesting. One of the other advantages of using something like KubeVirt is we have storage vendors and networking vendors who have put in effort to integrate with the Kubernetes subsystem. And guess what? It's all applicable to KubeVirt. And so you can use the same investment to work with these niche technologies.
So we're talking about so one of the big things for telecom was pass through, like you were saying before, and access directly to hardware. So you're saying that's functionality I can bring into KubeVirt too, right? Like, is it any faster? Have you noticed any like speed increase or anything like that? Is it better or is it about the same? Because we'll talk. So KubeVirt's actually it's libvirt running in a container, right? Like that's kind of what it is at the very basic level. Or so it's just a layer up, but you can still do the same type of things, right? Like maybe Poonam can go into some of that. You've touched on network functions and stuff like that already.
Yeah. So yes, the answer is yes. You would be gaining the same capabilities when it comes to pass through, right? So, for instance, what is pass through, right? PCI. When we talk about PCI pass through, which is the most sort of desirable feature when it comes to telcos or edge computing cases. Now, pass through is wherein you are actually your physical NIC is divided into a lot of virtual functions. It's like directly connecting the physical NIC to the container or a VM, right? Now, with KubeVirt, you could achieve that with the same sort of efficiency. So if you do a performance test against a bare metal virtualized hardware against the KubeVirt VM, which is running your workloads, the kind of performance you get is almost identical. So it's definitely going to match what you have currently today, but will also give you the benefit of the added benefit of KubeVirts, like what Roopak kind of touched upon, self-healing orchestration plane, which is not the current state with OpenStack, right? So it's not self-healing in nature. You could have multiple sets of VMs running, which something called as virtual machine scale sets, and Kubernetes constantly monitoring the state of the VM. So if something goes down, it actually self-heals it. So a lot of features of KubeVirt which are much more better than what the current OpenStack has to offer, plus the benefits of pass-through, like I mentioned. Now, pass-through, PCI pass-through is one of the aspects. The other aspect is something called as CPU pass-through, wherein you want to exactly copy the host CPU configuration to the VM. Now, in case of VMware, for instance, right, or you talk about other platforms, sometimes when you're using a bare metal virtualized hardware, right, a hypervisor, when you deploy a VM, the virtual driver will kind of tone down the CPU capabilities, right? So if my CPU supports a certain megahertz, the VM will not have the exact sort of CPU capabilities, right? So host pass-through will actually allow you to have the same sort of capabilities the host CPU has, right? So that those kind of features, along with pinning, which is again an excellent feature if you want really, especially in telcos, you have something like control plane and data plane sort of traffic at the network level. And if you want your data plane traffic to really have dedicated CPU all the time, so I want the traffic to go through a specific CPU core only. A specific core should be utilized for that traffic. That could be done through CPU pinning, which is also supported with KubeVirt along with the topology manager, the CPU topology manager. So I think it is kind of it gives you the best features of virtualization along with the best features of orchestration which Kubernetes has to offer. So definitely the performance is almost identical when it comes to both.
Do you have a follow-up, Roopak, to that excellent answer?
Yes, so in addition to the networking stuff that Poonam explained, if you look at something like GPUs, you can do pass-through. Mike, you mentioned it's the same libvirt, so we know how it was done in other hypervisors, including OpenStack. You also have the ability to do virtual GPUs. So all those are available as features on KubeVirt, just like the way they were available in other KVM-based environments. So yeah, it's a very powerful framework that is really ready for prime time.
So is this the year of KubeVirt, or is it maybe next year, right? Like, are you seeing a whole lot of interest in it? Like, is it ready? Is it production? Is it ready for production? Right? Like, I see a lot of groups are pushing it and saying, hey, this is what we want to do instead. Like, you've got Red Hat and other groups too that are very interested in it. You've done a lot more testing, not the Red Hat, but a lot more testing that I've seen on my side. Is it ready for production? Like, are customers succeeding with it like already? Is it?
So they are on their journey towards it. Obviously, it's still new, and our customers are migrating towards it. And as you can imagine, our customers have really large environments, so going through all their workloads, migrating towards KubeVirt does take time. But from a technical perspective, yes, absolutely it is. And Red Hat, you mentioned, they have been working pretty hard. Just today, I saw they released a study of running 400 virtual machines on a particular node. So that's pretty exciting. That's really exciting for our joint customers, where they are looking for these kind of proof points on how it's succeeding in the field.
So I think so my next question was kind of, well, I don't know, Poonam, if you have a follow-up on the technical side. Like, does it feel as, I think that was the biggest thing when I got into Kubernetes coming from OpenStack. It doesn't feel like I'm doing anything. Like, does it feel like I mean, I know with like setting up network and stuff like that, it feels like you're doing something, because OpenStack's like, oh, it's going to take me like forever to install everything and get everything set up. And I have this, like, all these services I have to connect in. Does it feel like does it feel like that for KubeVirt when you're working with Kubernetes versus OpenStack? Or does it feel like does it feel like, oh, this isn't just going to fall over? Like, OpenStack felt like it could fall over because networking stuff would hit limitations, but it doesn't feel like that much with like Kubernetes for me so far.
So I mean, my first encounter with KubeVirt was when I was with Entity. So we were kind of evaluating it, and I do think personally I found it a lot more easier than deploying an OpenStack. Like you said, the OpenStack networking and everything together, that's a lot more complicated than deploying KubeVirt. So it's definitely simpler, and somehow I feel, at least that's again a personal opinion, so I feel Kubernetes is a lot easier to work with. So any person, like, everything is in a YAML, all your definition goes into a YAML, you know what you're defining, what you're getting. So it's kind of easier for people like us. Like, I feel that is more comfortable. Working on KubeVirt is a lot more comfortable.
Yep. Just one thing to add, Mike. While this is comfortable for people like Poonam, this may also be a challenge for folks who are not used to infrastructure as code and dealing with YAML files after YAML files after YAML file. That can be tiring, and frankly, we at Platform 9, we have recognized it, and others have as well. So you will see that there are nicer UIs to help with that fatigue, so that folks who are not really inclined to work with the CLI way or the YAML way, they can still go and do point and click and manage it. And hopefully, by doing that, and in the process, they will also be able to really use infrastructure code down the line. So that's really the hope.
I say it's all a huge migration to cloud data from like a point and click, like maybe vSphere setup, right? Like, it's this big thing of self-service, but then also I have to figure out all this new stuff. But it also makes networking easier, right? Like, once someone gets all the networking stuff set up, I can start using built-in stuff within Kubernetes to give access to these VMs and give people a way to SSH to them, and then lock down things a little bit easier than, oh, I have this external firewall, I have to set everything else up, so I have to have like network engineers doing all this stuff. does it feel like the security is a little bit easier to manage? Like access is a little bit easier to manage for this? Like once you've got the network set up and locking things down, or like how's that work?
I can take the first crack, and then maybe Poonam can add to it.
Yeah.
I would say networking is always difficult. It's never easy, specifically if you are talking about securing things at a granular level. But yet again, I would say that the pattern that Kubernetes has established is really helping there. So for example, network policies at the Kubernetes level that equally applicable to the virtual machine as they are with containers. So those patterns are helping, but you still have to think about whom do you need to get access to, whom do you not give access to, and so that works still needs to be done.
Right.
Okay.
So I kind of agree with Rupak. Security is a huge responsibility when it comes to enterprises, and it's not just limited to how you secure your ecosystem around your VMs and containers, but it's also the entire setup end to end. So it's a huge responsibility. It's never easy. Definitely, every environment has to be secure. But I think we at Platform 9, at least what I feel is we really think, a lot about how we secure it in the best way possible when we are deploying workloads in production. So definitely, uh, it's the same sort of challenge with both, but it's easier with KubeVirt because again, I would not say when you talk, I'm not on the complete ecosystem, just on the VMs and containers. It gives you the security Kubernetes has to provide. So definitely that helps.
I think day one Kubernetes people are like, this is amazing. And then like you said, start talking about ingress and other stuff and their eyes just glaze over like, oh,
Yeah.
like, what are you talking about? All this extra stuff. I'll say, thank you for
it's difficult. Yeah. I mean,
thank you for the
kind
comment
of
too in LinkedIn. Oh, sorry.
My,
So if anyone has questions, let us know.
One
Sorry.
more comment on that.
Yeah,
One more comment before we move on. We didn't talk about the load balancer point that you were asking about.
Okay.
So I remember with OpenStack, we used to have a different load balancer as a service, and then it went through multiple iterations, and there were vendors supporting it, and it was great. But what we find is with Kubernetes, some of those things are much simpler. The inbuilt services concept, which gives you load balancer as a service for internal to the cluster, as well as external services which can create load balancers, like we use MetalLB in our product. They are extremely handy and extremely light for the use cases.
So it's basically a pod, right? So I can use ingress and that kind of stuff with this too, right? I could do like layer 7 and higher. Like I can make it easy to send something to a like a legacy site that I'm WebSphere, some old thing that I'm running on a VM. Like I can make that easy for my users too, and then open up ports and stuff for them, right? Like is ingress pretty integral to what customers are using this for, or are they hosting older like software on it and then they're
So I think different customers, different use cases. So I have seen customers really taking up their old virtual machines, which is just really using TCP, not even HTTP, and then putting it onto Kubernetes. So that's one use case. The other one is what you just mentioned, where they are using their web application, which is running in a virtual machine. It hasn't been ported over, and that's where ingress can be useful. Now, but you have to remember, a lot of folks, when they create virtual machine, everything's embedded inside that. So even the web server is embedded inside that. So can ingress be used? Yes, I think it can be, but are people using it? Probably not.
Gotcha. I'll say thank you for the comments too on LinkedIn. Thanks for the comment on the setup. If anyone has questions though, if you have questions for Roopak or Poonam, post them in there, and we'll try to field them as well. Like if you have questions about KubeVirt or Kubernetes or virtualization of this layer. But let's go ahead and let me move to the next thing. Those questions or the answers were so good. Now I have to figure out what to ask next. I think you've kind of covered a lot of the stuff that I have in my questions. Like, I'll ask it since we already kind of covered it. We'll cover it again for people that are just watching now. So OpenStack seemed like a stepping stone, right? With cloud init and small images coming from bare metal and virtual machines, which KubeVirt also uses. What's the real migration process? We kind of touched on it, but maybe we'll go into a little more detail. What's the real migration process from coming from straight bare metal or maybe using VMDK and stuff like that. You said I can convert my images and stuff. What if I'm using all Windows? Like, what do I do with Windows? Like that, I looked at the KubeVirt documentation and it's telling me to install with an ISO. What does that mean? Like, can I build Windows images and run them there? We go maybe Poonam first, since Roopak did last time, or whoever likes to answer.
Okay, so the migration strategy, right? I think, Mike, you touched upon a very sensitive topic when it comes to enterprises again. So if I am running OpenStack, I want to migrate my workloads to KubeVirt. What's the path? How do I do it? So, of course, there are conversions available from different. With from say OpenStack to KubeVirt, that definitely is a lot easier because OpenStack uses QCOW2 and the same sort of images is used by KubeVirt. So it's almost like a lift and shift. You could lift your workloads from OpenStack and then kind of shift it to the KubeVirt platform. Uh, However, there would be challenges for some of the workloads wherein conversion methods are not available, but there would be ways where you could build custom images for your platform. There are different ways where you could build custom images for your platform with whatever settings you need predefined and use them within KubeVirt. Now, KubeVirt does allow us to kind of reuse those images. So like suppose it's not like a recurring effort. So if I want to host a particular workload on KubeVirt, I could create a data volume and kind of clone it each time I'm deploying the VM, right? So which means I could create something like a template which gets deployed each time I want to deploy a similar kind of workload.
And that's
And it
kind of
also
comparing it
gives,
to like Glance, right? Like Glance, you don't have an
yeah,
image repository in the same way necessarily, unless you create that outside, right?
right. Yeah, true. So that is what I think would be a way if some of the workloads are not directly available to convert to the KubeVirt platform, then this is what you could do. You could build your custom images out of it and then use them as templates to deploy similar workloads each time. Right. So,
Then maybe you're
however,
configuring with like Cloud Init after the fact to do like special stuff. Like you can still use these scripts to
yeah, you
modify it
could.
if you want something different.
Cloud Init is very much supported with KubeVirt. So that is something that, like I said, if it's OpenStack, you could easily lift and shift those workloads from OpenStack to KubeVirt. The migration would be a lot more simpler because
Yeah,
it's the
'cause
same libvirt layer which handles it. So
the harder thing is going from like a different hypervisor, right? Like with different images and
yeah,
stuff. Roopak, maybe you've had those questions asked of you a couple of times. Okay, I'm using VMDKs or VHDs or something like that. What do I do? How do I get there?
Well,
Like
if it is
they're
Linux,
300 gigs big too.
yeah, if it is Linux-based images, yes, there is a cost to convert from the VHDs to QCOW2s of the world or the data volume transformation that Poonam spoke about. But if you are using Windows, it's the same challenges that we had were going from VMware to OpenStack. You need to have support for the Virt.io drivers that need to be installed within those Windows virtual machines. So you have that initial hurdle, but assuming that you do not have a sprawl of 300 base images, then you can get the work done once, embed those in your images, and then move over to KubeVirt. It's essentially the same process that we
Yeah.
followed with OpenStack.
but it is possible. So it's not something that is out of the way or something that cannot be done. It is definitely possible to run a Windows VM too. So it's not something that we cannot do. Now, if you look at it in a different perspective, right? like if you are a company who is running, say, purely Kubernetes, right, and you want to deploy a Windows VM, where do you go, right? So at least it's giving you a choice to kind of run those VMs in the environment alongside your Kubernetes layer, right? So which means it does give you that kind of power or flexibility to kind of do things your way. So definitely it's a middle path there. So it's possible to do it.
I'll say until the KubeVirt guides are updated. Maybe they're updated now. I haven't looked in like a month or two. You look at the OpenStack guides for how to build Windows images. They may help you a little bit better, and then you can template them out and then reuse them.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let's go to the
So
next
it's
one.
like most
Sorry,
enterprises, like I think KubeVirt, not just the templates, right? Also the flavors, right? Like in OpenStack, you have something called as flavors. You define that my VM needs to have say 2 GB RAM or 2 vCPU. you could create similar presets with KubeVirt, where you could use that as a virtual machine preset while deploying a VM, right? Which means it's giving you exactly the same sort of power of templating it and also using a specific flavor to deploy each time you want to do it.
So like you're doing
So
like in the
that
YAML. So maybe you provide that to your developers or like a Helm chart or something like that with specific claims, right? Like in
right,
resource
you could
limits. So
define,
those,
yeah. Yeah, so that helps you like have same sort of resources for a specific workload each time. Suppose you want to deploy 100 firewalls and you want all the 100 firewalls to have same resources. You're not going to go on defining it each time, right? You're going to use a preset or a flavor. That's what you do in OpenStack, right? So KubeVirt also gives you that, not just templating, also the flavor part of it. So definitely it is growing towards a path where, you could actually do all of your virtualization tasks using KubeVirt easily, I would say.
so that's like day two stuff. Is there any other interesting day two stuff that you run into? Either of you can answer. Like the idea of like at first I'm just going to deploy my VM. And, oh, this works. Wow, I can run this. And then it's like, okay, now I need to start templating, like you're saying, and I'm creating
Yeah.
like resource limits and requests. What else is something that like I haven't really used it in production all the way? What's another interesting thing that you start seeing?
So a lot of day to stuff, of course. I mean, I think at least I feel KubeVirt, a lot of development is happening around that day to stuff. Like you want to live migrate VMs or you want to block migrate VMs. So there's a difference between what live migration is and what block migration is, but it supports both, right? There was a time when I was with Entity and it did not support the block migration feature, which it does now. So just to kind of elaborate on this, live migration is like wherein you have a shared storage and you want to kind of move your VM off from one hypervisor to another. uh, so that's a typical day to operation, right? For a maintenance or for an upgrade, for hardware maintenance, you want to move off your workloads from one host to another host. That is pretty much supported with KubeVirt. And suppose you don't have a shared storage, you have local storage. You still want to migrate workloads from A to B, host A to host B. That is also supported using block migration, wherein it copies the entire block of data from say host A to host B to migrate that VM over, similar to what libvirt does it, actually replicating what libvirt does it. So say like, that is one of the day two features. And then there are some of the day two features which are still under development, like for instance, the volume expansions, right? You have defined a PVC or a volume for a, you want to increase the size of disk for a particular VM. That is now supported. There are some features which are still not there, but I'm sure they will get there. For instance, the CPU and the RAM sort of hot plugging of CPU and RAM resources. That's currently not there, but I'm definitely sure that it's gonna be there in some time. So some
So
of
you
these
mean like
data
automatic
operations.
resizing, or like are they going into the VM and doing it manually? Like, are you're talking about like automatic
Yeah. So
resizing?
hot plug is like I could online resize my disk, right? But if I want to like hot plug my CPU or RAM, that is not something which is supported at the moment with KubeVirt, but definitely something that may come up in the future. But storage is the recent sort of advancement, like in the latest releases of KubeVirt, where it is supporting hot plug of storage resources. So that is some of the common. These are some of the common day two operations you would want to do, right? Disk expansion, CPU or RAM expansion, or say live migration of VMs for maintenances. So it's getting there, I would say.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And so Rupal, what about you
So
with customers? Like, what is their insights on day two or three? Like, oh, I can do this now.
so one of the things that specifically if you're running in production and that I've seen is with OpenStack, we spend a lot of time working with Project Masakari. I hope I got the name right, which was with respect to high availability
Yeah.
for your virtual machines. And at least one customer, they were pleasantly surprised that that was available out of the box with KubeVirt because of the way it was architected. So that was huge. The other thing that our customers ask for is what about monitoring? Um, you have obviously VMware has monitoring, and there are third party companies who provide monitoring on VMware as well as OpenStack. What do you do for monitoring on KubeVirt? Now, guess what? Uh, you have LibVirt available, which exports out of matrix. And so we are actually working with one of our customers who wanted to monitor their applications. And what we have done at Platform 9 is have those exporters, Prometheus exporters, readily available by default turned on. And so they were able to scrape those metrics from Platform 9 and from KubeVirt directly, and then really do their capacity planning or monitoring for their application which is running inside the virtual machine. So those are some of the very interesting things that are coming up when we are getting into production with some of these customers.
So I'll ask the hard question now. What is KubeVirt not a fit for? Like, are there certain use cases where you might not want to switch to it yet? Like, or I guess some of the hard things too is like coming from VMware. VMware's got a huge ecosystem around training, and there's a huge pool of people that understand it and that can work on it. And like day one, you can just hire like five people that know VMware. Like, is that one of the difficulties of KubeVirt, or is that like a stopper for the use case, or is there other like technical reasons why you might not want to switch to it?
I don't think there are technical reasons why you wouldn't want to switch, but frankly, it's all about the culture of the team as well. You're used to one way of working, and do you want to change it? Do you have cloud native workloads coming in? Are you going to operate your workloads more like you do in clouds? Is it more infrastructure as a code or not? Are you afraid of Kubernetes? I've seen that too. But if as long as you're willing to learn these new skills, I think KubeVirt is an excellent choice.
Poonam?
So I think where it's not a fit for is a very interesting question. So I think most of these decisions around what to use, what not to use is usually business driven, along with some of the challenges that Rupert mentioned. Whether do I have a tech team to handle it? Is my tech team comfortable managing a platform, right? So I think, but most of it is towards the business strategy is what I feel. So if I'm a company who wants to go to containers as a platform and want to have my legacy workloads kind of migrated to containers eventually, I would definitely look at KubeVirt, right? However, if I'm a company who want to always run through VMs and I'm afraid of change, no, I don't want to change it. It's too difficult. Change is always difficult, right? So in that case, I would want to stick to my current platform, or say OpenStack or CloudStack, whatever platform you have, you want to stick to that, right? So it's mostly driven by business, like what the business strategy is, what they want to do, say 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, what their vision is. If they do want to move towards cloud native and they do want to move towards digital transformation, I think they would definitely look at KubeVirt, because that's a way where you can ease that journey. I think the main role here it's playing is that it's easing that journey of moving towards cloud native.
Gotcha. All right, we're getting close to time. Let me go ahead and I'll say to Poonam first. Do you have any hobbies or anything fun that you're working on outside of work that you want to talk about, or anything maybe you're focused in on work and there's something new that you're messing around with that's outside of KubeVirt? Anything else you want to say?
Hobbies outside of work, of course. I mean, a lot of hobbies, but I'm a very artistic person, so I do like to paint, and all of that is something that I like to do. So, and then I like to do yoga a lot. I'm really a big yoga fan, so I mean that it helps me relax, it helps me focus. So, outside of work, this is what I mean, and then spending time with my family, of course.
Yeah. How about you, Roopak? Are you working on anything fun outside of work, or?
Well, I picked up something new and interesting due to COVID. So during COVID, we were all inside, and then when the restrictions started getting over, we started hiking in nearby places. So that was a pleasant addition to the hobbies that I used to have.
I say it's beautiful down there too when it rains, right? Like, so you have the green hills instead of the brown hills around like the Bay Area.
Well, it's been drawn for a while now. So
is it now?
we are waiting on more rain.
I'll say thank you both for your time. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up with talking about KubeCon real quick, since I promised that. So I'll be there. Stop by our booth. You can talk to us about KubeVirt. You can talk to us about Kubernetes. You can talk to us about OpenStack if you want to. We're mostly talking about Kubernetes, but we'll talk about some of that stuff. I'll be there. Some of my guests coming up over the next couple of weeks too will be there. But it'll be October 24th to 28th in Detroit, Michigan. So stop by our booth, get a shirt, hang out, ask us questions. But I think we're done. I think we hit right around 45 minutes. Thank you both for your time. Like I said, we'll see y'all next time.
Thank you, Mike. It was fun.
Thanks, Mike. Yep. It was really